Hi everyone, welcome. If you could grab a seat, there's plenty of space up at the front as well. We're going to get going now. So thank you for coming to the Oxford Martin School. My name is Ben Caldecott. I direct something called the Oxford Sustainable Finance Group based at the Smith School here at the university. Now it's wonderful to welcome you to this talk today by Guy Newey. Some of you know Guy. I'll say a bit about Guy's background in a second, but his talk is on how government decisions really get made and what it means for net zero going forward. I've noticed since I saw the title, there have been some dots added to after made, which I think is kind of interesting. Gives you a sense of where the direction of the talk perhaps. But really timely, hugely important topic, given that the politics of climate action in the UK, but also internationally, is getting much harder, even though the costs of the transition, our ability to deliver the transition, has improved almost exponentially. Now, Guy is incredibly well placed to help us understand these issues and to share his experiences of them. So, as you can see from the slides, he's currently the CEO of the EnergySystems Catapult, and I think he's had that role since 2022, and before that was Director of Strategy. And then before that, Guy worked for two Secretaries of State as an advisor, Greg Clark and also Amber Rudd. I was trying to remember the names of the department back then. I'm pretty sure it was DEC when Amber was there. What was it called when Greg was there? It was okay, it was Bays by that stage. And then before that, Guy was head of policy at OVO, one of the kind of challenger energy suppliers, and director of the Environment Energy Unit at the think tank Policy Exchange. And before that, a journalist for AFP in Hong Kong. So a very varied career, and through that career, engaging with government, helping government to make key decisions on the energy transition. So we're going to hear from Guy for about, I guess, 40-45 minutes, and then we're going to have some Q&A, which I'll moderate. Please do think about questions you want to ask Guy. And then just as a reminder, please say who you are, where you're based, as you ask those questions. A note that this is being recorded. It's going to be made available afterwards online, so we'll circulate that link with you. Please do share that with colleagues and with people in your network as well. So without further ado, over to you, Guy. Thank you so much for coming.
As a Wednesday afternoon treat for you all, I'm going to start with an energy infrastructure of the UK quiz. Try and contain your excitement. Is this going to work? This is what happens. Practice 4 times. There we go. There we go. Anyone name what that is? Incorrect. Ratcliffe-on-Soar, somebody said. Who said that? Well done. No prize. That is Ratcliffe-on-Soar, which was the last coal-fired power station in the UK, which closed on the 30th of September 2024. That is a photo taken by me at the closing ceremony by Uniper, who own the site now. That was powering away since the 60s, absolutely huge power station, and the end of a kind of hundreds of years of history of coal generation powering the energy system. So I'm going to tell you the story today, at least my version of the story. There's some people in the room who may challenge my version of the story. My version of the story of how that decision to close coal in the UK, that extraordinary decision, thinking about a country that's been through the Industrial Revolution. How do we get to the stage where those cooling towers, which I think may or may not have been knocked down now, how did they get closed down? What was the political decision that allowed us to get there? Right, that's enough energy infrastructure. Does anyone know who this is? Amber Rudd, yes, she was at the time. So I'm going to take you back further in time now to November the 18th, 2015. God, it feels like ancient history. And Amber gave a speech at the Institute for Civil Engineers in London, where, amongst many other things, she announced that the intention to close coal. She said, I'm not going to do an Amber Rudd impression, although I did work for her for a long time. I'm pleased to announce that we will be launching a consultation in the spring on when to close all unabated coal-fired power stations. Our consultation was set out proposals to close coal by 2025 and restrict its use from 2023. If we take this step, we will be one of the first developed countries to deliver on a commitment to take coal off the system. But let me be clear, we'll only proceed if we're confident that the shift to new gas can be achieved within these timescales. I'll come back to that last line, because actually that last line's quite important in the whole procedure. So this was Amber Rudd. So it's 2015. It's just after the, a few months after the election of 2015, when the Conservatives had won a surprise victory. Everyone was expecting Ed Miliband to be in charge of the country in 2015, if you remember that. I'm sure that will never transpire. But well, I wouldn't rule it out at the moment. But this was a huge, big announcement as part of Amber's speech going forward. And it's a long time ago now. The power stations have closed down, but it's worth remembering that this got a huge reaction when it was announced. Here's somebody when they heard the news that coal was closing. Everyone know who this is? This audience. Al Gore, yep, former Vice President of the United States, environmental investor, campaigner, etc. And Mr. Gore was absolutely delighted with this step. UK demonstrating the type of leadership that nations around the world must take. And this went all around the world, this decision. It was slightly, for those of us who were involved in making the decision, and as Ben said, I was what's called a special advisor, which is a political advisor to Amber at the time. We were quite surprised that this went international very, very quickly, partly because of Britain's historical position, partly because this was about a month before the Paris climate change negotiations, after kind of 5 bad years of climate change negotiations after Paris, and they were trying to get momentum going again. So there's, Al Gore absolutely delighted. So that's November the 18th, 2015. Let's go back a bit. How did that decision, the politics of that decision get made going forward? So I'm going to go, next person on this slide is, I'll give you a bit of a clue, is the premier energy and climate academic in Britain. It's going to annoy some people in this room, isn't it? Yeah. No, of course. That's Michael Grubb, Professor Michael Grubb at UCL. And this just gives you a bit of the historical context in 2015. So Conservatives won the election as a surprise, and then proceeded in a kind of scorched earth policy to kill any remnants of what could largely be called the greenest government ever, which was David Cameron's announcement in 2010. We want to be the greenest government ever as part of the coalition. Over 5 years of kind of very bitter fighting between the Lib Dems, who ran the Department of Energy and Climate Change, and the Treasury, run by George Osborne, the Conservatives have slightly moved away from that greenest government ever position. And in the few months after the 2015 election, they banned onshore wind, or didn't quite ban it technically, but there hasn't been a lot of onshore wind built in England for the last 10 years. They scrapped zero carbon homes, perhaps the worst policy decision in the environment and climate change over the last 20 years. I would say it happened 3 weeks before I joined government. I can't say that I would have been able to stop it. It was pretty unrelenting. They were reducing subsidies for feed-in tariffs on roofs, for bioenergy, for lots of different areas. And the green blob, if I can call them that, were particularly angry. And Michael, for those of you who don't know Michael has, and I'd probably say this to his face, I consider him a friend of mine, slight occasional tone of being slightly pompous, very unusual amongst academics, I know. And he wrote this, he was quoted in a press release. And Michael said, this is a pivotal moment in UK energy policy on which it is beginning to look like the UK has 2 governments. Who says this stuff? one that is pressing for strong international action, blah, 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 signed an unambiguous cross-party pledge to phase out unabated coal, reiterated its carbon targets, and which committed in its manifesto to deliver clean renewable energy as cost-effectively as possible. The other is a government which has moved to prematurely end support for the cheapest of the UK's main renewable resources, which has injected fear and uncertainty into renewable energy investors. Sooner rather than later, David Cameron must clarify which government he is really leading. Well, it's like, yeah, good stuff, Michael. I'm sure David Cameron is thinking a lot about what you're saying at this particular moment. But and part of my job as a special advisor is to get annoyed at people like Michael Grubb and to phone them up and have a kind of grumpy conversation. And Michael said, well, I didn't really say that. I was like, Michael, is it in a press release with your name on it? He goes, yeah, well, I didn't quite phrase it like that. I'm like, okay. But either way, it actually had a really strong effect on me, and because he was kind of right, rather annoyingly, and it really got under my skin. And we were trying to work out, what we do about it, because the politics, think about Amber's position. Now, part of your job as a special advisor is to think about how you make your primary, your Secretary of State, how do you make her succeed and fly and go up the next rung of the ladder? And partly because, certainly I joined government because I wanted to do things. I wanted to change things. And crucially, I wanted to reduce our risks related to climate change. So Michael's challenge was actually a pretty good articulation of the political dilemma we faced at the time. Actually, there were some quite sensible measures on cost reduction, and indeed, if some subsequent governments had thought about the cost of energy as much as we did, might be in a slightly better position, and I'll talk a bit about that later. So how could you have a credible green policy for the Conservatives was the kind of heart of what we were thinking about those few months. So we kind of scorched earth, zero carbon homes, onshore wind, scrap subsidies for solar, et cetera, all of those challenges. And you had a kind of all-powerful George Osborne at that point and Treasury dominating every decision, even more importantly than usual. So you're thinking to yourself, right, where shall I get some answers about what we could do to solve our political problem going forward? And so I went into my network and I decided to have a chat with this guy. Anyone recognize who? Those of you paying attention, he was the guy doing the opening presentation. This is Ben. This is Ben Caldecott, who is what I would describe as a maven. Anyone heard that term? It's like basically someone who knows everyone. It's like an arch networker extraordinaire, connected to everyone going. I'd know Ben because Ben said, as Ben said in my introduction, I worked at Policy Exchange, which was a kind of Cameroonian think tank, centre-right think tank, thinking hard about how you tackle climate change, which hadn't been a priority for the kind of centre-right for a while. Ben had been my predecessor in that role, much more successful than me, certainly at raising money, has a magical ability to do that. And we had lunch, I don't know if you remember this, Ben, we had lunch about a few days before I joined as a special advisor. And I was kind of thinking, God, this could be really bad. Like, I've been trying to think about positive environmental action for a long time. This government looks like it doesn't want to do anything, it wants to go backwards. And Ben said, a couple of things to me. And we had lunch in the Tate Modern. We did. I don't know if you remember that. Yeah. Ben paid. He's very good at that. And he said, don't do any of that CCS nonsense. I think that's one area where he and I have always slightly disagreed, although we did end up not doing CCS for various spending review reasons. And he said, close coal. Close coal. I was like, can we really do that? Can we really happen? And he reminded me that the helpful thing was that the government or the party had already committed to close coal. And this was a pledge, this was a cross-party pledge where David Cameron, the Facebook guy, bacon sandwich, they had signed this cross-party pledge to close coal. The important bit, don't read it all, but the important bit was to accelerate the transition to a competitive, energy-efficient, low-carbon economy and to end the use of unabated coal for power generation. Oh, great! It's already written down. Oh, well, it's not going to be very difficult getting cross-government agreement on that. He's signed it. It's happened. Well, this guy wasn't. I think it's safe to say that he didn't particularly remember that he'd signed that pledge. And if you go back to that pledge, it's actually quite carefully worded. It's got no date on it, right? And you go, no, there was a negotiation. Oh, well, let's commit to a date. And from what I understand, that wasn't happened. But so, first of all, how do you get somebody? But that helped when we were inside government, because the fact that David Cameron, the Prime Minister, had already committed something makes it slightly easier to get him to commit to it. Again, not certain, but it makes it slightly easier. So how do you get David Cameron, busy chap at the time, Prime Minister, this is pre the 2015 election, how do you get them to sign this cross-party commitment? You know, because it's not easy. It's not like you can just ping him an email or WhatsApp him, although we didn't really have WhatsApp in 2015. It's probably the better functioning of government. So, anyone know who this is? It's getting a bit tougher now. Nick Eyre, well done. Matthew Spencer, anyone? Matthew Spencer was director of an organization called Green Alliance. So Green Alliance was kind of an umbrella group for businesses and NGOs and people pushing for greater ambition around climate change. Inevitably, Ben Caldecott is on the board of still on the board of Green Alliance? No, not, but you were, right? I haven't made that up, right? And so Matthew was director at this time, and Matthew was one of the people that I trusted as a special advisor that I trusted. Somebody who could say, we're thinking about this, and it doesn't leak. By the way, that's not always the case. I had people who worked for Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace, who I remember having who I'd known for a long time, I thought had a trusted conversation, and it was on the Guardian website about 20 minutes after my conversation, which is when I punched the wall at the Department for Energy and Climate Change and didn't speak to Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth ever again. But Matthew was different. You could tell him stuff, he would give you a really saying, that won't work, this will work. But Matthew would organize that letter, trying to keep together the consensus around climate change. And, but he couldn't get Cameron to sign it. He didn't know David Cameron. How's it going to work? So he brought in this guy. Everyone know who that is? God, people fade into obscurity quite quickly, don't they? Nick Hurd, well done. Nick Eyre is smashing this quiz. So Nick Hurd, old Etonian, went to Oxford, mates with David Cameron, son of Nicholas Hurd, kind of Foreign Office minister, etc. Matthew Spencer knew Nick Hurd. Nick Hurd's a big environmental, kind of naturally pro-environment action, and knows David Cameron, grabbed David Cameron, I think, in the Commons and got him to sign the pledge. Said it would be really helpful. And this is kind of one of the themes that's going to go happen. It's like the networks you have are absolutely essential to getting any of this stuff done. Right, so what else was going on in the background? Now, if anyone gets this, I'll be impressed. Jan Rosnow. This is Chris Littlecott, who was a researcher for an organization called E3G at the time. And E3G, along with people like Keith Allott and others, were trying to get coal. They said the thing that will make the biggest difference to tackling climate change will be getting coal off the system globally. And Chris was a kind of researcher who was all in the detail of which coal-fired power plants, how old they were, what they were doing in different markets, what the regulation would work on. And he was, whirring away, thinking really hard about how all of these things together. And you need people like that. You need people like Nick Hurd who can get you the right signature, But you also need people like Chris, who are going to do the kind of detailed policy work. So ultimately, you're going to have a policy choice going forward. Because the person that you needed to convince on anything in the Cameron government of 2015 was this guy. Remember him? Oliver Letwin, yeah. Ex-Rothschild banker, the only guy who was also writing philosophy tracts whilst also running the government. He had a job in the Cabinet Office, which was basically Cameron's brain, if that's the right way of saying it. Not to say David Cameron doesn't have a brain, but he needed somebody who would, right, I need you to fix this problem or do things. And so any issue, David Cameron go, well, what do you think about this, Oliver? Oliver likes energy, he's interested in the subject. We were once in a period of government where actually there was always a risk of the lights going out, which is a kind of classic government killer. Oliver would be going power station by power station with our officials going, well, how old's that? Have they done that maintenance? You know, he'd get into that level of detail to try and make things work. So we needed to convince him that it was also a good idea. So we've got Cameron on the pledge. We're now into the detailed weeds of policy, because you don't just have to convince David Cameron it's a good idea, you have to convince the department that it's a good idea, the officials that are going on in there. And you had, and it's safe to say the department was skeptical. This is about closing coal-fired power station. Well, why would we close them? We want to keep, you know, you're worrying about security of supply this winter, why would we close them? And I think the official advice initially was not to do it. So you've got the official advice saying no, and you've got the kind of politician or Amber going, well, I think I want to do this. I think we can do it. Let's challenge the official advice. So we're going to have to get some outside experts in. So we're back to this guy again. Remember him? Here he is. This is 10 years older, but Ben hasn't looked any older in the 20 years that I've known him. And he goes, don't worry, I will get some money to this guy. Anyone know who this guy is? Yeah, there's some like Aurora people here, aren't there? Yeah. John Fedderson. Now, in 2015, Aurora were not the international global behemoth consulting firm that they've become, right? They were upstarts, troublemakers, exactly the kind of people I like. And John was getting into the modeling game. This is John Fedderson, for those who don't know, who is the CEO and founder of Aurora, which has become a really successful company. And so Ben got a bit of money. I don't know where he gets his money from, probably from some of the green blob. And he got a bit of money, and they paid for a bit of consulting from Aurora to look at when could you close coal-fired power safely without creating a security of supply risk. And that a piece of analysis said, well, you can close it in 2020. No problem. It was like, whoa. Anyway, and then there's a lot of conversations between the modelers. So, you know, Aurora are keen to do this because they're keen to raise their profile. They're keen to show that they're influential. It's a really important piece of analysis for them as a company. And then you're back and forth in a debate going with the officials about whether it's the right thing to do. And it was kind of, you know, marginal, etc. And John, you know, credible Aurora modelers are saying, well, do it by 2020, no problem at all. And the department going, don't do it at all officially. So you've got that debate going on. So you've got the kind of political conversation going on, is Oliver Letwin going to sign off, etc. Then you've got the kind of analytical debate going on at the same time. Will the department do it? And then you've got, hold on, I've lost it. Then you've got this guy in the middle of it. Anyone know who this is? There's a strong clue. Should have cropped this picture. So I was one of the special advisors. I was what's called a policy special advisor. And on the other side, you have a kind of media special advisor, right? Policy special advisors thinking about political implications of the policy choices you made. Media special advisors terrified of everything. Like these guys are, you know, they're basically, some of them don't want to do anything because they're absolutely terrified of getting a bad headline in a Daily Mail. And Mo was super cautious. He was like, why are we doing this at all? We've shut down onshore wind. That's what the party wants. If Amber wants to progress, just do what George Osborne wants, and she'll get a promotion. That was Mo's. So how am I going to? And he goes, aren't we? Mo was not an energy expert, and Mo goes, aren't we really worried about the lights going out this winter? Why would we do an announcement that says that we're going to close down power stations, big power stations? Why are we going to do that? So Mo had to be convinced and calm down, but he was, so you're playing out the kind of the party politics of it all. You think about the grand politics, which is we need something pro-environmental, something that we can take to Paris, something that has a strong track record on, that we had to work through. And that's why, not just Mo, but actually there was a couple of things we were worried about when we did this announcement politically, because what you're really worried about is how the message is going to land in the jargon. And what that means is, what are people, experts, stakeholders, what is Nick Eyre going to say about this to the Daily Mail or whatever it is, right? And we were worried about two things. The thing I was most worried about, and Amber did this big speech in November. I wrote most of it with a great speechwriter called Greg Simpson. And I was feeling so physically nauseous that I didn't actually watch any of it at all. I had kind of wandered around Whitehall for about 40 minutes until it was over. But I was so worried that we were going to get a kind of backlash, which was going to say security of supply risk, government makes it more likely that lights are going to go out, kind of headlines. That was one area that we were worried about. So this is why you end up with a line like here. But let me be clear, that's a classic politician tell for you've really got to listen to this. This is really important. We'll only proceed if we're confident the shift to new gas can be achieved within these timescales. Actually, in the middle of the gas crisis of the last 5 years ago, actually the timetable slowed down a bit. So actually, I think Ratcliffe was meant to shut a bit earlier. But that was the big worry. You'd have all the power generators, big generators coming out and saying, what the hell are you doing? This is a massive risk to security of supply. The other thing that I was worried about is that the green blob would say, well, this is not very ambitious. This is a bit pathetic, isn't it? Aurora have just told us you can do it by 2020. Why are you saying 2025? And so I was really worried about that. And so at that point, it's really important to understand when you're inside government, it's very difficult to get a sense of how people are going to react to a decision because you really get yourself into a bubble and you're just talking to the same people all the time. And you kind of go, do you think this is going to land all right? And people go, yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. And you don't really know. So part of the job of a special advisor is having conversations you shouldn't actually have, i.e. you're giving information about what government policy is. You're having honest conversations because you kind of want to hear from people, actually that's not going to work or that is going to work. And Matthew Spencer at Green Alliance was one of those people, somebody I could trust. The other one was this woman. Everyone know who this woman is? Emma Pinchbeck, now CEO of the Climate Change Committee. At that time was senior job at Renewable UK. Certainly one of the people advocating for this. And I had a really important meeting. And I said, Emma, who I'd known for a while, didn't know that well. And I said, I can't get 2020. We're going to go 2025 with this weird thing about 2023. Is that enough? And she went, yeah, it'll be fine. Green groups go for it. Almost all the green groups went for it. Obviously, Friends of the Earth said it's not ambitious enough. Friends of the Earth, F off. But again, part of the job of this, of actually getting a decision made, getting the confidence to do it, is having these conversations in and out of government. And part of, so this is the kind of informal thing. If Emma had turned around and said, you know what, if you do 2025, the green groups are going to say that's on top of everything else you've done, that's going to be not enough. Now, the speech was also full with commitments on offshore wind, which was almost killed, is worth saying. We almost killed offshore wind in 2015, which would have been a mistake, I think, safe to say. There was an important meeting with Oliver Letwin, which is probably another talk that I should do. But we had offshore wind, we had a commitment of the system operator, we had other things in that speech. It was kind of a good, I think, a good package, well worth a read going forward. But you need to have those relationships with people on the outside who can give you informal advice. And the great advantage for you guys, think about how you can influence policy, is how do I get those relationships with people on the inside where I can be influencing them going forward. So look, this is my first bit of the talk, and then I'll talk about current politics. How decisions really get made. So social networks really, really matter. There's a load of old Etonians in there, Letwin, Hurd, Cameron. You might not like the world that is, but that is the world that we inhabit, or certainly was the world in 2015. Those connections really matter. And my advice to anyone trying to influence policy is work really, really hard at your network. It's just absolutely important if you want to have impacts and influence people. Evidence matters. There's sometimes a view of the world of how the policy process works is, well, we've got a question and we'll just go away and we'll do some more analysis and we'll think about it, and we'll do some modeling, and then the civil servants make a recommendation, the politicians will go, oh yeah, that sounds great. It's important. The Aurora analysis was really important. The work that Chris Littlecott had done was really important, but it is not enough on its own. Politics really matters. Campaigning really matters. Relentless, opportunistic. There's lots of things where you think, oh God, I've been campaigning for this for 15 years and nobody has listened to. And then something changes in the politics. The right politician comes in, the right circumstance, the technology changes, and then bang, you have an overnight success of something you've been working on for 15 years. So you've got to be ready, and you've got to be prepared to campaign for a long time. I think I've given you a sense of how messy the political process is. It's not ideal in a world that a conversation at lunch between me and Ben beforehand decides the future of coal-fired power stations in the UK, but why not? So it's messy, it's compromised. There's lots of, you do still need evidence. There is still a formal process. I haven't talked about right rounds and getting government sign-off, etc., because once those have happened, the decision's already been made. But it's not bad. Political process holds up pretty well. I was involved in a time in government during the Brexit crisis where actually that wasn't holding up. It felt like it was cracking, but that's another big story. But yes, it's messy. Yes, it's compromised, but it's a pretty good way of doing it. How to engage government and how not to. Right, the typical traditional model is do the detailed work, speak to junior, mid-ranking, this is very rude, junior mid-ranking officials, respond to consultations, and then once you've got through those stages, then you engage with senior people, and then you get you finalize that into the big idea. I think my advice would be often that's the wrong way around. Actually think about the big idea first and test it quite quickly with the senior people. Is this going to fly at all? Is there any chance of this happening? What's the political context? And then do the detailed work underneath. It's not quite that simple one way or the other, but too many people spend years doing that early stage stuff, and not enough speaking to a politician or someone senior and go, well, we're never going to do that. Perhaps nodal pricing over the last 18 months could have learned a bit from that. I don't know. Discuss. Right, I'm going to talk about net zero politics now. Where are we now? Well, this is where politics in the UK is now. It's a mess, absolute mess, kind of unprecedented clustering of 4 parties around the kind of teens mark. This is poll of polls. This is this is the election. Keir Starmer won a massive landslide on 33% of the vote, which is tiny. Blair won well over 40% going on. And since then, he's had an absolutely cracking run downhill. although a little tick up recently, apparently, although I suspect the Mandelson stuff won't help. What else has been going on? Reform, going up, flattening off a bit, 29%, but they've been up as high as 33, 35%. Remember, you can win a big majority with 33, 35%, depending on how efficient your vote is. Conservatives actually rose after the last election. That's when Kemi Badenoch beat Robert Jenrick, but struggled. Bit of a bounce back recently, but kind of bubbling around 18%. The Greens, look at them, surging. This is when Zach Polanski took over, and he's been bouncing up in the polls, despite not really having any interest in environmental issues, as far as I can see. Discuss. And the Lib Dems, despite all this chaos, really struggling to make any difference. Too busy bungee jumping, whatever he's doing. So this is a mess. And this is a situation in the UK which we have not had for a long time, kind of a real, much more European, multi-coloured political system, etc. So, my central case is Reform will win the next election, maybe with a small majority, maybe a hung parliament. That very much depends on whether Nigel Farage can hold it together. But people are really fed up. I mean, people are fed up. They think, they haven't had a pay rise in 15 years, on average. And if you're outside the southeast, it's not a particularly pretty picture on the economy. Okay, this is the most important chart in UK energy politics, and I should have had more time to do the chart properly, but what I did is just a screen grab from Sky News. That's the back of Ed Conway. This is the most important chart in UK energy politics at the moment, which is industrial electricity prices. And the UK, we are leading the world. Look at that. Yes. World leaders in that chart. Take that, Slovakia. Our electricity prices have got extremely high. Lots of reasons for that. We've got a very gassy system, but the legacy cost of renewables is certainly a significant part of that going forward. And that is playing out dangerously. Now, we can argue, is it important for the British economy? My favorite comment on this is, actually, we're really a service-based economy. I think there was a great guy on Twitter who said, our economy is basically Bet365 and OnlyFans. Two British success stories there. But, this is certainly having an effect politically. And it's probably the most salient fact in energy politics at the moment. And so what you've got, partly as a result of that, not just because you've got the kind of consensus around net zero is fragmenting. You've got Kemi Badenoch saying net zero by 2050 is impossible. Anyone who's done any serious analysis knows it cannot be achieved. Well, as I've worked for an organization that does a lot of serious analysis, including scenarios, well, it can be achieved, but it's not easy. It's certainly hard. But the Conservatives, and particularly Kemi Badenoch, has said they won't do net zero. Still committed to environmental issues, but we're not going to do it that way. Oh, and we're not going to have the carbon pricing as well. This is Richard Tice, who casually says, we will seek to strike down all contracts signed under AR7, so this is allocation round 7. So this is the latest offshore wind and onshore wind. And this was a letter he sent to a load of renewable developers, also a load of people who didn't do any developing of renewables, so they were quite surprised to get that letter. Shows you that perhaps reform aren't the slick political operation that you hope. You should treat any long-term revenue streams as politically and commercially unsafe. Good luck ripping up those contracts designed specifically for challenge to that. But that's serious stuff, right? If you buy the central case that reform are going to win it, are you going to invest in a renewables farm? I don't know. And then you've got Ed Miliband. This is, I could have picked anything about that, who's just powering on, literally, powering on. This is a comment related to the system operator report, which says we can achieve clean power 2030. This was a rebuke who said clean power by 2030 was unachievable. They were wrong, we were right. Well, we'll see. Bloody hard to get to clean power by 2030, etc. But what you've got is that consensus that existed in 2015, where you have Boris being, and then beyond, you have Boris being super ambitious on climate action, is fragmenting, is worrying. So if you work with the kind of innovators we work with at the Catapult, do you invest in the new product? Can you attract venture capital money to move to the next stage? Do you want to develop a wind farm, etc.? All of these things. And one thing which I'm happy to talk about in questions is, you know, Ed Miliband and the government are accelerating the move to more and more centrally planned energy system, more and more decisions made by government about the technology mix, about where technology is going to go. Does that reduce risk? Does that increase risk? We'll go forward. So, pretty gloomy. Pretty gloomy for those of us like me who think that climate change is a significant and urgent risk to human prosperity. Is there any good news? So let's get some charts from the Smith School. So this is work by Dome Farmer and Rupert Ray and some of the team who I think are affiliated with the Smith School. Oh no, I always get lost. Always get lost in all the affiliations. But this is cost of technologies, useful energy cost from 1880 to 2020, oil, coal, gas, etc. And the important thing to note is these, and so they've looked in a fantastic way at kind of historical cost series of technologies. And the argument they make is that technologies largely have a kind of, because of the nature of their technology, for a doubling of deployment, they have a kind of predicted cost reduction. And the good news is, if you look at solar, the orange line, if you look at wind, which is the kind of blue line, not quite as aggressive. If you look at batteries, which is the purple line, these are extraordinary, and I would say unstoppable cost reductions going on. They're an absolutely fantastic technology. And similarly with kind of power to fuel, that's basically at the cost of electrolysis going forward. And if you look at other key components in electricity, you know, around lithium ion, around motors, around electromagnetism, the costs are falling all the time. So even if you don't give a monkeys about climate change, this stuff is happening, this cost reduction is happening, and it seems to be unstoppable. That's what gives me optimism, that even if the politics is bad, we'll have an opportunity to, the technology is just changing so fast. So what should we all be doing? How should we all be thinking about this problem? This is my last slide. So I would say this as somebody who runs an innovation center, but our best hope remains innovation. Making things which are clean and green, that they are cheaper and better than the high carbon alternatives. Like that should be the goal. The model of human behavior where you get everyone to kind of wear a hair shirt is just flawed. We need stuff to be better. And as I say, we're seeing great progress. But innovation does not suddenly appear. There's a kind of model of innovation that you can do it all in your shed. It takes a long time, it takes money, and in the regulated sector like energy, it takes policy and regulatory change. So you do need to get the incentives right, you do need to get the support mechanisms. As I say, we are seeing progress in lots of key technologies going forward. You know, electric vehicles are going to just win because they're better. They'll be cheaper soon, but they're already better, faster, funner. Not so much in nuclear, CCUS, Ben's favorite technology, not making the progress that some of the models suggest it need to. Aviation's hard. People have sunk a lot of money in sustainable aviation fuels, electric planes, etc. Buildings is hard, although the technologies exist. People are awkward. Politics is awkward. And industry, lots of the processes are hard, although I see much more optimism about industrial electrification than I think so. And we need to think, and I would say this is the systems catapult, and this is my kind of advice to people thinking about this, we need to think about it in systems. How is this all going to work together? You need to think about the source of generation, the pipes and wires, the buildings, and those awkward bastards, the other side of the meter, voters, people, citizens, whatever you want to call them. You need to think about how electricity, heat, and transport are going to work together, and you need to think about physics, so my engineers who I work with tell me, digital, markets, policy. All of that has to work together. It's a huge challenge. There are strong headwinds, but I'm actually more optimistic than I was 10 years ago when we made that speech. Thanks.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Guy, for that really interesting talk and running through, how decisions get made in practice. And I know a lot of people here will be thinking about and are actively engaging with decisions in the UK, but also internationally. So those insights were really helpful. We've now got time for questions. So who wants to go first? I see lots of usual suspects. Are you going to take more than one at a time? I'm going to take one at a time, I think. Okay. Can we get at the back of the room? Yes. Not you, Mike, sorry. Yes.
Okay, hello, I'm Jessica. Oh, thank you.
Hi, Jessica.
Hi, I'm actually one of Ben's students in the MSc in Sustainability, Enterprise and Environment here at Oxford. I wanted to ask you about the green, cheaper alternative point. I was thinking about carbon capture and storage. What is the high carbon alternative that you're fighting against there? Like, what's the political case for carbon capture and storage? It makes sense to strengthen solar, wind, and batteries because they provide short-term energy services for the everyday person. So how are you going to make that case to the everyday person to invest today in carbon capture?
Yeah, so great question. And you're getting right in the divide between me and Ben over the last 15 years on this. So it's, just because of the fundamentals of carbon capture storage technology, it's always going to be more expensive than the alternative, right? Because you're taking a well-established process using a combined cycle gas turbine, and you're adding a load of extra stuff on top of it, which is just innately going to make it more expensive. So my view is the role of it is always likely to be limited, but the homework question, the kind of system homework question that you're always thinking about with decarbonising the economy is that 2 week, no wind, very cold event. The Dunkelflaute, as Richard Howard at Aurora would always uses, like, you've got to solve for that challenge. Like, that's the hard challenge. So in that world, you need, when you haven't got wind and you've got limited amount of solar, you need stuff that is going to keep you going across that. And lithium-ion batteries are wonderful, but they are not going to solve that problem, right? You just can't build enough of them. So you need something with greater energy density. Now, my view, my ideal world, you get the cost of nuclear down significantly, and that would fill in a lot of that gap. But I still think you're quite likely to need some gas. There's also a system question, because you're also, if you can combine the infrastructure with industrial decarbonisation, so you can capture some CO2 off there, you can combine that with power, but you need a kind of anchor load. Would I bet that CCUS is going to have significant cost reductions? I don't think so. I think, but on a system basis, I still think it's worth getting us, certainly in the UK context, 2-3 gigawatts. Let's work out how much it costs from a system point of view. I'm getting less and less convinced of that than I was 50. One day I'll catch up with Ben and his view of the world. I see actually the role for hydrogen for power actually quite compelling, potentially. It's a kind of, perhaps more storable technology, but I don't think it's the time to take it off the table. So it's kind of optionality. How do you win that? It's a much harder argument to win than something like solar power or wind, where you're seeing those cost reductions coming on.
I probably gave the microphone away a little bit too early, but I see you're making the case for carbon capture and storage in association with gas as a substitute for baseload. Yeah. But I'm thinking more about like the carbon dioxide removal aspect of it. Like, is there a way to convince the public that carbon dioxide removal is necessary when it doesn't actually provide any, it doesn't provide an alternative service to an existing one today?
Yeah, it's the truth is I don't know what the right answer to convince the public of doing that. You're going to need a lot of negative emissions in most of the models if you're going to meet 2050, 60 ambitions. And so combining it, yeah, I have talked about gas, but the modeling gobbles up bioenergy with CCS. Absolutely loves it because it's getting, you're getting the power benefit, but you're also getting the negative emissions benefit. But that is a not uncontroversial opinion. And, the more I spend in this game, the more kind of confident I am that purely clean electricity, solar, wind, nuclear, batteries is just going to win at everything, and you're going to be left with a relatively residual kind of molecule section. But we haven't made as much progress in direct air capture technologies, in negative emissions technologies as we need to, and we see it as a key innovation priority.
Thanks, Jessica. Good question. So, gentleman right at the back. Yeah.
Cheers. Thank you, Guy, for that talk. That was really interesting. My name's Victor. I lead the flexible energy research at Aurora in GB. And I'm just trying to marry up some of the conclusions from your talk. I was hoping you could help. So on one side, we have like the techno-optimist view. Technology is going to save us. That's one side. And then on the other side, we have this, as you put it, fracturing political consensus where the deployment of those technologies, onshore wind bands, offshore wind bands, and so on, seems to be, the objection to that seems to be increasing. So how do you stick those two things together? Or are you just taking a view of pessimism there?
No, I'm definitely not taking a view of pessimism at all. I think, so my model of how this is going to happen at the pace and scale, we need it to happen globally, right? And I've focused on the UK context, but we need this to happen globally, right? So these solutions need to be better than the alternatives, right? You can see that happening with electric, not just electric vehicles, but electric transport. We do projects in India with smaller vehicles getting around. Those electric vehicles are just better. And it's not perfect. You haven't got the transport, you haven't got the charging infrastructure in place, etc. But they're going to be better. They're going to be cleaner, and they're going to be cheaper to run, much more efficient. You can see that there. You can see it with solar. Maybe not in a northern latitude like the UK, but you can see it elsewhere, and certainly in parts of the world where your comparison is not the kind of grid like we've got in the developed country of the UK. You've got an unreliable grid. The kind of solar battery combination, avoiding all the risks of large scale grids and the difficulty of maintaining those, will absolutely explode. So you've got in transport and in power in large parts of the world, you've got success. I remain super optimistic about nuclear. I always get the naysayers. You see what Korea have done on nuclear. You see other markets. I think it's actually a regulatory problem going forward, but I don't think you've got to convince people. Heating is a challenge, and people in this room have thought about it as much as anyone. Heating is a challenge because you've got a consumer unfamiliarity problem. But we also know there's loads of markets which have effectively got low carbon heating systems, and they seem to function as an economy going forward. But people don't like change. But they will change to things which they think are better. And those of us who've had a heat pump installed, well, it's just better experience. Actually cheaper to run, not cheaper to buy at the moment. But we'll get there.
Okay, so we've got lots more questions. We're going to take two at a time now.
Okay. This is when I'm going to have to get my notebook. I can't remember more than one.
Sorry. So yes, lady at the back, close to Victor. Yes, and then Jan in front.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. My name is Hannah, and I'm also in the SE program with Jessica, also been a student. On that point, and to your answer to Victor's question, you did say earlier that in order to enable those green technologies to take off, we need to ensure that the environment is such that it facilitates that and it's supportive. And even if it isn't policies, it's just about those signals to investors, etc., that we're going in this direction. And obviously, it would be a rational thing to ensure that. But we know that politics isn't always rational. So my question is, how would you ensure that this trajectory does not clash with the ideology, like the ideological ideas in politics, and especially the rise of extreme right, not just in the UK, but also worldwide?
So the way I think about this question is, how do you convince Richard Tice to take the low carbon choice? And by the way, from what I understand, I haven't met him. I'm not in the game anymore. But people who've met him is like, oh yeah, I love electric vehicles. I love solar panels on roofs, etc. Like, it's just, if the stuff is better, then people will do it. I just think, certainly with, lots of people don't like subsidies. I don't really like subsidies. I'll be completely honest about it. I'd much rather you tax the externality and you do it. I mean, I'm not sure I'm giving a satisfactory answer. There will be people who just don't. I mean, when we were in government, we banned onshore wind. I mean, total ideological. That was the cheapest form of electricity at the time. But you also have to take, it's about how far you can push people. And by the way, what I worry about is with the 2030 clean power, it's just full throttle. We don't care how much it's going to cost or what the opposition is. We're just going to get as much done as possible, as much contracted. Like, politics is about judging what people will accept as the right pace, and they will accept change as long as it's managed well and it's explained well, and people can see a brighter uplands. I'm not giving a satisfaction. It's really hard, this stuff, but politics is hard.
Just to unpack that a bit more, though.
Yeah.
I mean, so net zero is this thing that reform it'll be on the top three things that they talk about, right? If not the first thing. It has become this lightning rod. It's become this very politicized issue. How do we depoliticize it? You've given a bit of a sense about that. It's got to be compelling and better. Yeah. But there's also the politics of that. Clean power or clean energy target by 2030. Ed Miliband's obviously generating a reaction from the right. What's the combination of things to depoliticize net zero? So I'm with the view, Ben, that you don't want to depoliticize it. You want to politicize. It is political. Energy is political. You want to go that my vision of the future is better than your vision of the future, and I think Miliband's doing that in the wrong way. Miliband is saying, oh, absolutely, whatever renewables we build at whatever price is going to be the right thing for the economy. And I think that is the wrong approach, partly because that chart with Ed Conway's back on there. But I think you've got to go and make a political argument about why you think this is important, where genuine UK comparative advantage is, etc. And actually, it's potentially quite narrow in the clean energy space. We're certainly not going to become leaders in solar panels. We're certainly not going to become leaders in lithium ion. Those ships have sailed, despite the fact that lithium ion was basically invented about half a mile down the road. Not invented, but the cells developed. Peter Goodenough. Like, you've got to tell. This is why I spend my time in innovation. You have to say we're trying to come up with better solutions. So it's about owning a vision of the future. And Miliband is trying to do that. I'm just not convinced by it, because I think he's willing to pay absolutely anything for just getting more green electrons rather than the steadier transition. Okay, so is the question more about what's the vision of the future that gets us to net zero that's going to appeal to reform voters? Is that
I mean, very simple terms, politics is about competing visions of the future or trying to scare the bejesus out of people. right? And right now, the point I was trying to say is right now people, this is a huge generalization, but people outside the kind of thriving, London ambit are struggling. They haven't had a pay rise in 15 years. And so they are not thinking about the future. They're thinking about whether they can, afford their energy bills in a week's time, or feed their kids, or whatever it is. Right? People are really struggling. So right now they are struggling to listen to any vision of the future, particularly from a set of political parties who they blame for where they are at the moment. And what Reform are doing, and it's kind of classic populist, I actually don't think it's as simple as, I think there's some really interesting people in Reform. I spent a lot of my summer listening to every podcast I could about Reform, trying to understand what's going on. But they do have populist elements. And what I mean by that is they're not understanding that there are trade-offs, that there are genuine trade-offs. They're kind of saying, well, the problem is net zero. You're like, okay, well, you might not think climate change is a risk, but relying solely on gas is not a risk-free option. We've just seen that over the last 5 or 6 years. So the challenge with trying to debate with people who are not willing to confront any trade-offs is their message is always easier. But it's like the Blair used to do. There's the kind of the 6-second answer, there's the 30-second answer, there's the 2-minute answer. And you've got to win, politics, you've got to win on all 3 of those. So you've got to win a vision of a future. This government is struggling to do that generally. It's got a story at least on net zero. And you've got a way of neutralizing that fear. This stuff is better. That's why I say it all the time.
Okay.
Or
so
can be better. Yeah.
More questions. So Jan first, and then the lady near Jan next. We're going to do 2 at a time.
Thank you. Jan Rosenaar, professor here at Energy Policy and Climate Change Policy. I would like you to make you speculate, but take that story a little further and maybe also take it globally. So let's say we in the UK decide to go down the route of reversing a lot of policies, net zero is no longer a thing. Many of the promises of lower bills will not happen because the alternatives are more expensive. Meanwhile, we're seeing other countries march ahead, like China, but also outside of China, African countries, Southeast Asia, with other technologies that are sort of coming in terms of innovation. Where does this leave the UK if you fast forward 10 years in that scenario where we have a reform agenda and the transition unfolds in other places?
So,
Sorry. One more.
Hi, I'm Ritwika Sengupta from the British Standards Institution. I work mainly on international policy and regulation. My question is about picking up on that point you made of creating better products and creating low carbon options. Could you talk a little bit more about how that might pan out when we are in the age of disinformation and misinformation? So how do you still continue to land that a product is better or a choice is better when evidence doesn't have the same value that it maybe did 10 years ago?
Yeah, I'll take that, and then I'll take Jan's little question on 10 years in reform. So, yeah, there's a lot of bad information out there. But my model, I'm not a marketing expert, but we've got a big consumer insight team at the Catapult, partly because we're trying to get the energy system to actually think about consumers for the first time in 30 years or ever, perhaps. And yeah, there's lots of misinformation flying around, but there's lots of good information flying around as well at the same time, right? So people do it. But most people, let me try and tell this story. Many, many, many years ago, I had a summer job laying tarmac on drives, right? This is the glamour of growing up in Warwickshire in the 90s. And this guy, the guy who ran the business, he was a total charlatan. But he would go onto a road and he'd go knock on a door and say, "I'll do your drive for a third of the price," right? And we go and do it, and we'd lay it and roll it and try not to get tarmac too much on our shoes, etc. And he'd give that away. And then people would just come and say, oh, that looks nice. Suddenly my drive looks really shabby, etc. Most people buy stuff because they hear what their neighbour's experience is like. They hear what others are like. You know, it's the kind of, oh, you've got an electric car. Well, that's nice. How's that going? You know, that kind of, and that is info. You know, people are not going, well, it's getting, you know, X miles to the kilowatt hour and things. There'll be a bit of that chat. But it's going, oh, it's amazing. And you know what? I can burn off the boy racers at the lights every time. By the way, that's why heating is the thing I worry about, and why absolutely on low carbon heating technologies, we should be the government should be much more focused on quality of installs. And there's not enough focus on that because everyone has heard somebody who's had a bad heat pump install, right? Oh, I can't get my house warm. All my electricity bills are super high. So markets are really good at, and brands, the way that we navigate markets, are really good at working their way through this stuff. So it will take time to do it. So yes, misinformation. There's always been misinformation. And whilst there'll be lots of people pumping it out, there's also, you know, I don't think it's insurmountable. But again, optimist. Right, Jan's question, reform 10 years time. Right, so the scenario is reform win the next election, 2029, and they come in, what the hell does that mean for net zero going forward, right? So what do we assume that they're gonna do? So they're gonna scrap net zero as a target, definitely, 100%. Will they be able to do what Richard Tice says, rip up all the CFD contracts? I mean, they could. I remember being in a meeting where in 2015, this is how bad it was, Treasury officials going, well, couldn't we just rip up all these contracts? And thankfully somebody number 10 going, no, because that would mean nobody would ever invest in Britain again. Or at least there was a risk of that. So yeah, they could do that, but they spend forever in court. They probably lose. There's probably a way through it. You'd end up in some negotiation moving forward. I think that's probably a sideshow. The super pro-nuclear, love SMRs, so you make progress on those areas. I still think electric vehicles, certainly in 5 years' time, will be unstoppable. Heating's your problem, and spending any time on that. So making as much progress in there. But the challenge is, how do you, over the next 4 or 5 years, show that it can work really well in low carbon heating, can work really well in people's homes and buildings, as it does in loads of commercial buildings across the UK. Jan and I are on a WhatsApp group trying to solve this problem, so we have this argument all the time. But I don't think it's, I mean, I talked about a period in 2015 where things were really bad for energy and climate politics, scrapping stuff. And it goes through waves, I don't know, maybe I'm Panglossian, I don't know. I just think I'm so optimistic about where the technology is heading that I think that you'll still be able to make some progress, but not as quickly as you could do, or in fact we need to.
Okay.
Gosh, I've got to start answering quicker, haven't I?
Yeah, so lady next to you, Philip, who's another student, and then lady at the front afterwards.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Rose. I'm also one of Ben's students in the master's cohort. My question is, I was interested in your statement about energy is political, so we should embrace the fact that politics is competing visions of the future. But I'm wondering, making energy political then kind of incentivizes the other guys when they get back into power to take away everything you've just done, right? And kind of create this back and forth. And especially, you know, where I'm from in the States, we see that every single day. So I'm just wondering if you could expand more on why you think energy should be political, when kind of from that side of the pond, it seems like maybe it would be better if we could find a way for Democrats and Republicans to get on the same page about this vision that we're going towards, even if we have different routes to get there. So if you could expand on that. Thank you.
Great question. Don't we want to make this boring? I mean, the last thing we want is for this to be about totally different political visions that people fight over in the way they are doing at the moment. So a bit more on that, and then yes.
Hi, I'm Carolina from Doyne's Farmer Group. I really liked what when you talked about how to engage with policy decision making. But you know, like the first half of your presentation was Dance's network, right? Yeah. So I was wondering whether you can develop a bit how, as academics, we can ensure that what we do is actually incorporated into decision making. And for the early career researchers and graduate students, would you actually recommend staying in academia or going to policy institutions and trying to work from the inside rather than from the outside? Thank you.
Always, yeah. Okay. Right. So, should energy be bought? Do you know what? There is a line in that speech, Amber's speech, which said, "My vision is that by 2025, energy policy is boring," which was not successful. We have closed the coal, but energy policy is not boring. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm a bit split on this. I'd love energy to be boring, and what I mean by that is that people are just making the low carbon choices because it makes their lives better, right? That's what I see as boring. But we're in that transition period where that is not the case, right? And so you're making a political argument about why this stuff is important, and you've got to spend money to get the technologies down the cost curve, which of course is why you should probably focus on technologies which you think can get down the cost curve, which is possibly why you might not do CCS or nuclear, as that might be the other area. I just think, anything which is so so I would, certainly an aspiration that it is that the technology is so good that it's just a relative, and that bills are therefore cheap, that it's therefore boring. It's not, it's where it's traditionally been, which is, it's always been annoying that people have to pay energy bills, but they weren't out of control. Whereas now it's, cost of living is number one, and energy bills are number one kind of noise you hear from other areas. So maybe the heart of the question, the political bit, is what are you willing to spend to develop new energy technologies? Typically take 20, 30 years to get to maturity. And how do you want to pay for that stuff? Maybe that's where the political debate can be. But again, I'm not sure that's a satisfactory answer. But I don't think, I don't think Reform are going to, if they win in the next election, they're not going to win the next election because of net zero. I don't think that's what, I think people are angry about energy bills, but I don't. I think it might be a contributing factor, but it's not going to be the most important factor. As long as the parties have got a credible platform of how you reduce costs. Again, this is not, you need good politicians who can win big arguments about the future of the country, and that's rare and hard. Should you stay in academia or should you get I don't know. My advice would be, it depends what you want. If you want to play in that game, if you want to influence policy and have impact in that way, which I certainly did, you can absolutely do that from an academic point of view. But you've got to be out there, right? Producing a great paper is not enough if nobody reads it, right? You've got to be on LinkedIn, you've got to be doing conferences, you've got to be networking, you've got to be in SW1, arguing with people. And people are desperate for that. There's actually a real strong appetite for really good, credible, unusual, innovative ideas. And I would say the part of the reason that think tanks are so successful is because they understand that clear communication, snappy reports, not being so precious about nuance. God, I know this is not a thing to say to academic, this is what you should do, this is the way it should work. And they filled a gap which academia allowed think tanks to fill in. Think tanks are not as rigorous as academia, but you've got to fight for attention if you want to change things. It's that campaigning point of view. So whether it's academia or think tank or get inside government, if you want to change things, it's writing a paper or doing a great bit of analysis is just one step.
So Guy, we're running out of time. I'm going to take, sorry guys, I know chair's prerogative. I'm going to ask you two questions quickly. So
Okay.
the first is around other institutions that are sort of part of the government system, and I'm thinking in particular the Climate Change Committee and the Climate Change Act, which is something, of course, that's been sort of slated for removal by Reform and also by Kemi and the Conservatives. So kind of interested in how you viewed that bit of the system, our system, in the context of your experience of government decision making and what you think will happen. And then the other thing is geopolitics and particularly China. Obviously, the Prime Minister was just in China. You know, when people talk about net zero, that's also one of the next things we talk about, politically anyway. Yeah. So how does that pan out, and how might that impact what you want to see happen?
So got just a couple of little questions to finish off with. So I was a bit of a skeptic of the Climate Change Act before I was in government. I thought it put you down too narrow a pathway, didn't think about innovation enough, all of those questions. And then when I was in government and you're trying to get decisions made, I realized that the value of that long dated commitment that just kept you honest in a conversation, or should I say, kept a Treasury official honest. If we didn't have the Climate Change Act, what would have happened is we wouldn't really have done anything on this area. And we would have approved Swansea Bay Tidal Lagoon. And every time the government was asked about whether there's anything on climate change, to say, well, we did Swansea Bay, you know, 0.5 gigawatt, whatever ridiculous amount it was. And they would have been able to get away with that rhetorically. Like the Climate Change Act creates a rigor and a discipline. It's really important. I think Chris Stark, when he was doing Carbon Budget 6, went too aggressive. I think it's too hard. My view of these things is they've got to be just out of reach. Just got to stretch and we can get there. But if they're at the other end of the room or they're far too far away, people just give up. And I worry that that's maybe where we're getting to a bit on that. So if I was the government, I'd actually take some of the airs out of the tire and I'd say, for Carbon Budget 7, I'd say, maybe I don't take the Committee on Climate Change advice, I'll just drop down a bit. Maybe take some of the pressure out of the politics. Don't know. China, well, that's a big question. And I'm not a China expert, so I lived in Hong Kong and Beijing for 3 years, so I know a bit, but I'm well out of date. What do I know in this context? They are winning on lithium ion. They're winning on solar panels. They are winning on many of the key components that are going to make the electric future. Now, am I worried about that you buy cheap MG cars that are made by China? Well, I feel a bit sad as somebody who grew up in the West Midlands and family is in the automotive sector. I was there on the day that Rover was closed in Birmingham, that's happened. But from a consumer point of view, they're good cars. You know, they'll win. So they're geopolitically very clever, thinking about, you know, much more strategic than we've managed to be. They are systems thinkers to the point at the end. There are obviously downsides to living in a totalitarian regime, but they certainly have a lot of engineers in power, which has risks as well as rewards. What should the UK do in that context? Well, the UK should be realistic about it as a middle power in that world. In climate change context, it should be trying to provide a compelling example to the rest of the world on how to decarbonise, that it's not going to bugger up your economy. Right now, we're not doing that. A bit too expensive. And we should really focus on the areas where we have genuine comparative advantage. And by the way, and I would say this, the Catapult, where we focus on, we think around smart, flexibility, digitalisation. There are many, many exciting world-leading companies. Obviously, you've got some kind of giants that are being created around Octopus, and OVO is, you know, unicorn now. It's a bit wobbly at the moment. But the whole load of companies that are coming up, which could be really exciting in that space, that's where we should be doubling down in, not trying to, you know, make ourselves the world leader in every single technology. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Guy, thank you so much for that really thoughtful talk and answering the questions that you did. Really appreciated it. And now we've got time for drinks, which I think are going to be to the right in the cafe. And Guy will be sticking around, so I know there are other questions that people wanted to ask. So accost Guy out there and ask the questions.
Yeah.
And thank you all for coming, and thank you, Guy.